Hello, I'm Ellen Binns. Welcome to Impact, a podcast about how we can each bring about real change in the world and getting practical in making that happen.
And hello, I'm Clive Johnson. A special welcome if you're listening for the first time, and a big thank you to our new subscribers. Each week, we look at one aspect of how we can connect our heart to offer healing for others with our collective intention, prayers, and meditation, and talk about the critical happenings in our world that need our attention right now, some of which may not be making the headlines where you are.
So let's take a look at what we've picked up from the news this week and see where we might hone in with our prayers and intentions. As we record, it's March 13th, 2024. And the first story that we would like to look at is from Syria. The Islamic State militants attacked villagers foraging for truffles in eastern Syria last Wednesday, killing at least 18 people, while dozens of others were injured or missing or possibly kidnapped. The attack occurred near the town of Kobajeb and was one of the deadliest strikes by the Islamic State in the area in over a year. The Islamic State was defeated in Syria in 2019, although sleeper cells still carry out deadly attacks both in the country and neighboring Iraq, in territory the extremists had claimed as an Islamic caliphate.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. I must admit my attention hasn't been on what's going on in Syria, particularly those sort of refugee areas, for so long. And there are millions of displaced people living there and have been for over a decade now in some cases. And clearly these people going out to collect truffles, which is the way they earn a living, exposing themselves to a risk that is very much there. So yes, we talk about a defeat and perhaps the end of, I think they usually call it so-called IS, don't they? The media, what they've declared themselves, this very strongly ideological group, but they're still there, even though seemingly the story is they were defeated.
Yeah, really scary.
Yeah. Now, moving to China, there is a very big, in fact, two very big gatherings taking place in Beijing this week. This happens every March, the so-called two sessions, where Zhang Jingying, who's deputy director of the Science and Climate Change Department at the China Meteorological Administration, put forward a proposal to enhance early warning capabilities to effectively respond to climate change. The two sessions are the major annual meetings of the National People's Congress, that's the NPC, and the Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference, the CPPCC, that take place in China each March. And at the time of recording, those are still in progress. Jingying said, "Meteorology knows no borders and can make the greatest contribution along the Belt and Road." The proposal includes setting up an Asian Disaster Warning Center and Partnership Alliance, which would focus on providing early warning systems in countries that are a part of the Belt and Road Initiative. That's sometimes called the New Silk Road. It's an infrastructure initiative and alliance between nations that China dominates and began back in 2013 to invest in over 150 countries and international organizations. With this project, China aims to contribute expertise and solutions in weather forecasting, climate prediction, disaster identification, risk assessment, and system development. There have been instances where China's monitoring has already helped other countries respond to emergencies. There was a case in Pakistan not so long ago where meteorological data provided by Chinese systems proved crucial in addressing what was an immediate crisis. So from that point of view, this has to be a good move, I would have thought. Also speaking at the two sessions conferences last week, Chinese foreign minister, who gave, as I understand it, quite a rare press conference. This is Foreign Minister Wang Yi, has said that China sees itself as a force for peace in the world. At the same time, it continues to deepen its so-called new era of cooperation with Russia, while positioning itself as neutral in its position on the Ukraine-Russia war. That's at least the outward presentation. As China has continued to strengthen its relationship with Russia, Wang insisted that Beijing maintained an objective and impartial position and called for peace talks. A conflict, when prolonged, tends to deteriorate and escalate and could lead to an even bigger crisis, he said. So, whatever the relationship is between China and Russia, and I know there'll be different views from many different commentators, we here, staying above politics and not being in the know on these things, try not to offer our views on that, perhaps. But we must will that this is a serious intention, and China can really be a force for peace.
Yes, I've never heard that phrase from China before, that they want to be a force for peace. And maybe it's just because I haven't been listening, but that's encouraging.
I think so. And I didn't hear the whole press conference. I got the impression that he was quite strongly challenged. You know, there was Western media there. It was quite a, as I say, quite a rare thing for a very senior Chinese minister to be sort of put in front of the cameras like that.
Wow.
At least the world press. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Interesting. That's going to be an interesting one to follow.
It is.
And let's see their ability to stay impartial with the Russia-Ukraine war.
And whatever, they must, I would have thought, have the potential to play quite a crucial role in ultimately bringing about peace. How that plays out with Ukraine and how they present Ukraine and what assurances are given and so on is obviously a part of that picture. But yes, China potentially has this huge role to play.
Yeah. Well, in a story, we proposed for holding intention on International Women's Day last Friday. Courageous Iranian women and men are resisting the paternalism that represses women's freedom of expression and subjects many to daily harassments and inequality in areas including marriage, divorce, child custody, employment, inheritance, and even holding political offices. Following the death of Yina Masa Amini in police custody in September of 2022, protests held under the slogan Women, Life, Freedom have become the longest lasting demonstration since the founding of the Islamic Republic in 1979. Masa had been arrested for allegedly not wearing her headscarf properly. The government responded to the protests that followed with massive repression and violence. Exact figures are difficult to obtain, but according to independent human rights organizations, security forces killed at least 550 demonstrators in the 12 months following Masa's death. 7 men were executed in connection with the protests. And Amnesty International reported more than 22,000 people were arrested. Women and men who continue to campaign in memory of Yina Masa say that they will not give in, despite there being no signs of the regime changing its ways.
Incredible.
So good for them. Wow. Such courage.
It is incredible, isn't it, really? And literally kind of protesting to the death, really. I think we're going to come back to this with among our suggested intentions a little bit later. Well, I know we are. But one thing that struck me when I heard this story was around protest of any kind, really, where it is directed, how it is channeled, and knowing how to be effective with that, and not unnecessarily putting yourself at risk while continuing your cause. So that was an aspect of this. We see this with what's happening in certainly in the UK, and I know around the world at the moment, protests, either pro-Israel or pro-Palestine, that sometimes, even if the intentions are good for the protesters, they're not necessarily channeled in a way that gets the message across effectively. Environmental protesters in the UK who stick and glue themselves to motorways, for example, don't win friends. They don't achieve any progress in moving governments forward or winning over public support, and in fact alienate it, even if their intentions are good. So having some wisdom around how do you channel your protest?
Well, I think the fact And I say this in domestic violence situations and the state of the world on that, that the men have to get involved
Yeah.
for it to change.
Yes.
Just women protesting this, as you say, could possibly not be effective. But the men have to see the light and join in on the equity and removing these barriers for there to be progress.
Absolutely.
So I call the men forward, speak up, as I know you have 5. I know that you've taken.
Absolutely. And by the sounds of things, when I read in Iran, there is quite a strong movement from men as well, really supporting the women, and being out there at the front as well. It's it's not just resting on women's shoulders, which is really, again, wonderful given the great courage that takes for all
Yes.
involved. Some good news now. Spain is banning some short-haul domestic flights as part of its plan to meet COP objectives to reduce carbon emissions. Flights where there is a rail alternative taking less than 2.5 hours will no longer be allowed. Now, here's the sting in the tail: except in cases of connection with hub airports that link with international routes. So that includes the likes of the big cities. Certainly Madrid and Barcelona will be included there. France adopted a similar policy last year. A coalition of environmental groups said that 11, not very many really, 11 air routes could be replaced by train journeys under 4 hours, slashing Spain's CO2 emissions by nearly 10%. So that is not insignificant. Although since flights connecting to international hubs will be excluded, as we said, most routes would not be impacted. Perhaps this is a first step towards that. I have to say, in the UK, it's different I don't know what it's like in Spain, actually, but certainly in France it's very different, where the train's generally a lot cheaper. But in the UK, we have a problem with pricing because obviously it's private, competitive airlines and competitive railway companies. I would much rather take the train, usually, than take a plane if I was traveling between cities in the UK. But I might very often have to pay 4 or 5 times the price to travel by train than by a low-cost airline. Now, there's something seriously wrong there.
Yes.
And I don't understand it. Yeah, but that is a problem we have in a kind of capitalist society where there aren't subsidies or regulation, strict regulation like this. But yes, it seems crazy, absolutely crazy. Certainly if I was traveling to Edinburgh,
Yes.
as I do,
Yes.
it's almost sadly a no-brainer to go by plane financially in terms of the cost.
Well, this will be interesting to follow and see if there are any results or, there's a backlash from the people of Spain that it's inconvenient or, just see how this plays out.
Yes. I mean, with the international connection, you can kind of understand that you check in and you're going through your transit at another airport. I can understand why that is a bit more problematic to ban, as it were. But yeah, it would be interesting, as you say, see how the people react.
So from Spain, we're going to move over to Nigeria. And this weekend, 15 students were kidnapped by gunmen from an Islamic school in Sokoto village in northwest Nigeria. Those kidnapped were mostly below 13 years old. And this comes just days after over 280 students were kidnapped from another school in the Northwest. On Friday, Nigerian President Bola Ahmed Tinubu deployed troops to rescue the pupils. After over 400 abductions in a week, mostly women and children, Nigeria is again dealing with what some have called an epidemic of kidnapping. So between July 2022 and June 2023, more than 3,600 people are believed to have been abducted, although that actual number may be even far higher. School kidnappings in the country became common since the jihadist group Boko Haram seized over 200 pupils from a girls' school in Chibok in 2014. So the practice has been more recently adopted by criminal gangs seeking to extort ransom payments and that have actually no ideological affiliation.
Mm, mm.
So it sounds like it's motivated by money.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And that's a really worrying trend, really, this happening
Hmm.
so much because a lot are getting away with it essentially, or believe they can, although there have been arrests and there have been successes, as it were. Hostages have been released unharmed, which again, I think, proves how important it is for us to hold intention for
Yes,
directing.
for their safety.
Yeah,
Yes.
exactly. The Muslim holy month of Ramadan started on Monday in the Arab world, particularly. That is very important, and no less so in Gaza, where there is sadly no sign of a truce between Hamas and Israel and their war in sight. As fighting continues and a desperate humanitarian crisis deepens in the enclave, Gaza remains virtually under a near total siege, as close to 2.5 million people, estimated to remain there, are facing starvation. Jordanian, US, French, Belgian, and Egyptian planes parachuted aid into northern Gaza over the weekend, and at least one Spanish ship and I believe a US ship are headed for the coast, loaded with emergency supplies. Supply by land is desperately needed, not just these airdrops, which are really totally inadequate. Israel and Hamas continue to blame each other for failing to reach a deal. We reported last week on talks going on in Cairo. Israel demands a full list of surviving hostages, and Hamas calls for Israel to pull out all of its troops from Gaza. However, diplomatic efforts to reach an agreement continue, according to a source speaking to the AFP news agency.
And in Sudan, too, hopes of a ceasefire during Ramadan seem slim. As General Yasser al-Attah, representing the country's military, says that the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces, the RSF, must withdraw from civilian and public spaces, a condition made during mediated talks in Jeddah last May. At the time of our recording, it's unclear how the RSF will respond to the demand, while previous attempts to broker ceasefires have not worked. At the same time, the massive humanitarian crisis unfolding in Sudan demands urgent attention as millions of civilians have been displaced and face starvation there.
Well, we're certainly going to be keeping a very close eye on that. But
Yes.
very important not to, as we've mentioned many times, not to turn our eyes away from Sudan, where there is this massive humanitarian crisis, where there is essentially civil war, and often not taking the headlines, even if it is there from time to time in the world headlines.
Yes.
Another place that finally does seem to be making the headlines in the UK in recent days, long overdue, and we've obviously had our attention here as well for a while, is in Haiti. United Nations Integrated Office there, the BINUH, warns that nearly 3,000 pregnant women in the capital, Port-au-Prince, risk being cut off from essential healthcare if the current gang war-driven paralysis of the city continues. It says that 450 women are at risk of potentially fatal I can't say the word, obstetric complications. And these numbers are really, they're very hard to know how they come to these estimates. And really the expectation is they're probably much higher. While over 500 sexual violence survivors, I'm sure again that's, if anything, an underestimate, could be left without medical care by late March. Sexual violence against women and girls is used as a weapon of war, intimidation, territorial control, and domination, BINUH said in a statement, adding that many organizations who work to prevent gender violence in the country had either cut or stopped most services as the violence continues. Haiti's state of emergency is really on absolute red alert now, almost to the point of civil war. It was announced on Monday that Prime Minister Ariel Henry will step down once a transitional presidential council has been created and an interim leader named. Henry is currently in Puerto Rico, seemingly unable to return to Port-au-Prince. This 7-member transitional council will be formed ahead of elections, which will appoint a new prime minister. Efforts, which we've spoken about, to win international support to boost police strength in the country has been faltering. However, the mounting crisis this week prompted an emergency meeting in Jamaica. This was on Monday, which involved the Caribbean Regional Trade Bloc, CARICOM, Canada, France, the UN, and also US Secretary of State Antony Blinken. The chair of CARICOM currently, Guyanese President Mohamed Irfan Ali, warned that despite ongoing talks to restore stability and normalcy in Haiti, some Haitian groups are not where they need to be. The US this week promised $100 million to fund a multinational force to help stop the violence, so a real step forward on what we were talking about last week in terms of security, and also an additional $33 million in humanitarian aid. Now, this is a very complex picture, what's going on in Haiti. As we said last week, we felt ourselves a real need to try and dig much deeper to understand the context of what is happening. So we are, actually at the time of this recording, it should already have dropped, putting out a special deep dive looking at the situation in Haiti. It's long and very complex history, and I have to say that was incredibly educational for me, understanding more about why Haiti is actually facing and has continued to face over many, many decades so many problems. It's an incredibly, almost unique country in the Western Hemisphere, certainly in terms of the problems it faces. So please do listen out for that if you have a.
Thank you for doing that, Clive. I haven't had a chance to listen to it yet, but I'm really very fascinated by it, and I know I will be glad that I've listened to it and know a little bit more.
Yeah, and I think for me, it also brings home, as we often say, with intention, we try to get as empathetic. Now, empathy is probably not quite the word, because to truly empathize, we know we have to likely have been in a similar situation ourselves, but we can go some way in trying to understand, trying to appreciate the circumstances and that people find themselves in. And what I found particularly interesting here is, as is often the case when you take a deep dive like this, you begin to understand where the rebels are coming from, as well as why there's concerns about Henri and what Henri wants to do and why he's had problems, and the complexity of it all, which then perhaps puts us in a better position to approach a little bit of empathy.
Yes, or at least stay above the dissension.
Exactly.
And know that we need to, cover over all of this gray and complexity and confusion.
Exactly. And it's also interesting when we look at the international responses. At times they've been very helpful, as far as I can tell, and have done that. They've tried to mediate and to recognize the difficulties. At times they have been very interfering and seemingly made things much worse.
And they have their agendas, and it just goes on and on, doesn't it? Yes.
It does.
Never easy. There's no simple answer.
Nope.
There are no simple answers. That's what we need to learn. Right. So thank you again for doing that special edition of Impact on Haiti.
Bless you.
So some general reflections on our stories. We would like to give thanks for the movement in Spain to reduce carbon emissions and for the many answers to our prayers and intentions that are not known to us. We will for guidance for governments facing security crisis in Nigeria and Haiti, to have wisdom to know how best to target the increasing incidence of abductions and abuse of women in their countries. We will that China will be moved to use its influence to enable peace talks between Russia and Ukraine to take place within the immediate future, and for opportunities to agree peace to be recognized by the parties mediating peace between Israel and Hamas and in Sudan. We also hold those who may be prey to Islamic State attack in Syria, willing that they will be wise to the actions they can take to protect themselves from such attacks.
My goodness, so much happening. Yes. And as we often say, we're only picking up on a number of stories, hopefully giving a flavor of what is happening around the world, but there are so many more that I'm very conscious of we've missed this week as well. It seems to have been an exceptionally busy week. But finally, a good news story to end with. A newly released study of 103 elephant populations from Tanzania southwards reveals that conservation has halted the decline of savanna elephants in southern Africa over the last 25 years. As of 2020, the elephant population had rebounded to the same number as in 1995, which is estimated at just under 300,000. Besides protecting elephants in national parks, which has been the traditional approach, experts say we also need to connect the parks so that populations can stabilize naturally. This is known as the core buffer model, and it's already been implemented on the ground. For example, in Zimbabwe's Hwange National Park, home to an estimated 42,000 elephants, the elephant population in the park has remained stable over 25 years with only small fluctuations. This is explained due to the fact that elephants have enough room to roam, and when they need to, are able to move into buffer zones, cross to other national parks in Botswana, and access water sources as they need. These corridors allow the animals to migrate backwards and forwards when core areas are too crowded or when facing threats such as poaching or unfavorable environmental conditions. So a real success story there.
Yay.
Also, exactly. And wonderful that, this is, the scientists are saying, well, we've got another piece of the jigsaw now about how we can help, we can help nature do its thing, keep itself in balance.
Yeah, because as I'm thinking as you're reading this, to let them do what they need to do.
Exactly.
This isn't rocket science. Let them just be where they need to be and allow that to happen. So we love the elephants, right? So that's
we
really,
do. As
really
long as
good
not
news.
too close.
Yeah.
As long as they're not charging at you.
Yeah, they're not charging.
And
right.
the African ones, I think the African ones are the big elephants, aren't they? They're massive. So yes, you don't want to upset an elephant, I think.
No, but they're sweet too.
They are.
So in a week in which we especially remember the role played by courageous women in affecting change, we suggest keeping those brave souls campaigning for compassionate treatment in Iran as our main intention this week. We will that those who continue to campaign for women's rights in Iran have the courage, strength, and insight to know how to most effectively make their protest while minimizing the risk of harm to themselves. And as always, we'll include this intention in our show notes. That about wraps it up for this episode. Remember, you can connect with us in the Facebook group and for live intention holding in Clive's Daily Insight Timer offerings, and with me in the Labyrinth Activist Network's Zoom calls. Details of how to hook up with these are in our show notes. Look out too for our next special topic episode, which we'll be releasing in the next few days. Thank you for listening and for sharing with us and holding intentions. We look forward to connecting again next time. And in the meantime,
thank you. Go well. Stay safe.
And remember, we're more powerful together.
Impact is presented by Ellen Vince and Clive Johnson and produced by Impact Productions. Our theme music is by Chris Collins and our logo artwork is by Auto Classic. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Audible, or your favorite podcast provider. We're a non-commercial podcast dedicated to people of any faith tradition or none who yearn for healing in our troubled world. Please pass on the word so others may join us in making an impact. Thank you for listening.